Pat Boone and Elvis Presley were two of the biggest names of their time, rivals in the spotlight, icons in their own right, and, perhaps surprisingly, friends. But in July 1977, something unusual happened. While passing through the Memphis airport with his wife and daughters, Boone ran into Elvis one last time. There were smiles, playful jabs, even a crack about Elvis's weight. But then Elvis said something that stuck with Boone, a comment that now feels almost haunting. Just a month later, Elvis was gone. For years, Boone kept that final moment to himself. But now, at 91, he's ready to talk about what he saw, what he sensed, and what he's carried with him all these years. It might have seemed like a passing moment, but what it revealed? That's a different story entirely. From barn dreams to Billboard charts, Pat Boone, born Charles Eugene Boone on June 1, 1934, in Jacksonville, Florida, came into the world with a name that was almost Patricia. His parents had been expecting a girl, but when a boy arrived instead, they simply shortened the name to Pat, and it stuck. Not long after, the Boone family moved to Nashville, where Pat grew up as the eldest of 4 siblings. From a young age, he stood out as a top student and an enthusiastic performer. He sang anything and everything: gospel hymns, Bing Crosby classics, church tunes, and he performed just about everywhere he could. Whether it was a ladies' club meeting or an ice cream social, even while milking cows in the family barn, Pat found ways to sing. That same barn is where he'd dream about the future. He imagined himself on television, using his voice to pay for college, and maybe even become a teacher. Deep down, he hoped his singing might one day lead to ministry work, where he could guide and inspire others. Those early prayers didn't go unanswered. Soon enough, Pat was winning big on shows like the Ted Mack Amateur Hour and Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts. That led to a recording contract with Dot Records, then movie roles, and a string of TV appearances. And through it all, behind the spotlight, a quiet love story was quietly taking shape. He met Shirley Foley, the daughter of country music legend Red Foley, when they were just 16. She was a new student at his high school, and although Pat wasn't much into country music at the time, he quickly changed his tune once he got to know her. Their relationship moved slowly and sweetly. They dated for 9 months before sharing their first kiss, which, according to Shirley, was underwhelming. But Pat was serious. When Shirley's family planned to move away, he didn't hesitate. At just 19 years old, he asked her father for permission to marry her. Red Foley, with tears in his eyes, asked if Pat would take care of his daughter. Pat said yes. And that same year, in November 1953, the couple eloped. They settled in Teaneck, New Jersey, and dove into family life, welcoming 4 daughters within their first 5 years of marriage. Meanwhile, Pat's career was soaring. In 1955, he released his first hit record, 2 Hearts, 2 Kisses, and his version of Ain't That a Shame by Fats Domino became a chart topper. His clean-cut image and smooth style made him a go-to artist for covering popular songs originally recorded by black musicians. At the same time, Boone was studying English at Columbia University in New York, juggling college, a skyrocketing music career, and a growing family. Shirley managed the home front, while he balanced life as both student and star. By the time he graduated in 1958, Pat Boone wasn't just famous. He was a cultural icon. He had best-selling books for teens, a 5-year TV contract with ABC, a 7-year film deal with 20th Century Fox, and packed concerts across the country. But behind the scenes, marriage wasn't always easy. Shirley, worn out from multiple pregnancies, began pulling away emotionally and physically. Pat remembered trying to show affection, only to be met with discomfort and rejection. It hurt him deeply, and he often worried about where their relationship was heading. Eventually, they turned to their faith for strength. They were baptized together, not expecting a miracle, but hoping to reconnect. Through their church and spiritual commitment, they found healing. The rough patches they had gone through suddenly felt like part of a greater purpose. They knew their marriage still needed work, but they felt anchored by their renewed faith and church community. Pat was grateful, not just for success, but for a family he could share that success with. No matter how busy his schedule got, he made time for church and family every week. Even though he gave up on his dream of becoming a school teacher, Boone believed he could still make a difference. He saw his fame as a gift from God, something he was meant to use for good. Throughout his early career, he remained deeply committed to his beliefs. He would change lyrics he found inappropriate, reject film roles that clashed with his values, and even refused to kiss his co-star Shirley Jones in the 1957 film April Love. In showbiz circles, Boone quickly earned a reputation for being squeaky clean. One gossip magazine labeled him too good to be true, and entertainers like Dean Martin would regularly poke fun at his wholesome image. Boone later acknowledged that being the poster boy for morality sometimes wore him down. He became a target for jokes and parody, often compared to child star Shirley Temple for his image of innocence. But through it all, he stuck to his values, even when it wasn't easy. Before fame, Boone meets Elvis. Pat Boone and Elvis Presley's paths first crossed in October 1955 at a sock hop in Cleveland, Ohio. The event, hosted by popular DJ Bill Randle, was packed with thousands of eager teens. Boone was the headliner, already a recognized name. When Randle mentioned that a new act would be opening the show, Boone wasn't particularly impressed. He'd heard the name Elvis Presley on a jukebox in Dallas, but figured he was just another country act. Randle explained that Elvis was gaining traction in the South as a rockabilly singer and was making appearances on the Louisiana Hayride. Backstage, Boone met Presley for the first time. Elvis hadn't yet released a hit record and seemed completely out of place, just a nervous young guy surrounded by a couple of close friends. Boone noticed how Elvis dressed: collar popped, long pants, and worn-out white bucks, the same style shoes Boone wore himself. Elvis struck him as the kind of kid who might struggle in front of such a large crowd. But there was something undeniably unique about him. He had that rebellious edge, the kind of look that made mothers nervous and classmates curious. He was nothing like the clean-cut Boone, and that contrast was instantly clear. Elvis opened his set with Blue Moon of Kentucky, a bluegrass tune by Bill Monroe. The crowd responded politely, but it was his second number, That's All Right, Mama, that really lit up the room. It was bold, fresh, and electric. The audience loved it, but with only 2 songs to his name, that was all Elvis had prepared. He stepped off, and Boone stepped on, performing the 3 hits he had at the time. Boone still drew the loudest cheers that night, but it would be the last time they ever shared a stage. Still, despite their differences in style, the 2 young stars struck up a friendship, the rivalry that never really was. By the mid-1950s, the pop charts were all about 2 names, Pat Boone and Elvis Presley. Boone had the early lead, landing 3 songs on Billboard's Top 100 by the end of 1955. But it was 1956 when things took off, and the musical rivalry kicked into gear. That year, Boone dropped 4 singles with Dot Records, and remarkably, both sides of each record made the charts. 2 of them, I Almost Lost My Mind and Don't Forbid Me, went all the way to number 1. Elvis, however, had a landmark year of his own. He hit number 1 with Heartbreak Hotel, Don't Be Cruel, and Love Me Tender, carving out a bold new sound and persona that would define rock and roll. Their chart success continued into 1957. Boone came out strong with #1 hits like Love Letters in the Sand and April Love, while Elvis answered with All Shook Up, Teddy Bear, and Jailhouse Rock. The two weren't just topping the charts. They were shaping the direction of American pop culture. But their rivalry wasn't limited to the radio. In 1957, both Pat Boone and Elvis Presley officially became Hollywood stars. According to Variety magazine, Elvis scored big with Love Me Tender, Jailhouse Rock, and Loving You, all of which made it into the year's top movie rental rankings. Boone was right behind him, with April Love and Bernardine also making strong showings. When theater owners named their top money-making stars of 1957, the list included Rock Hudson, John Wayne, and then, right alongside them, Boone and Presley. It was clear these two young performers weren't just musicians. They were full-blown entertainment powerhouses. Despite their parallel success, there was no real feud between them. In fact, Elvis regularly praised Pat in interviews, calling him one of his favorite singers while on tour. Boone, for his part, returned the admiration, complimenting Elvis's vocal energy and success in rock and roll. Boone didn't see them as competitors and even considered inviting Elvis onto his new ABC television show. Elvis said he'd be happy to appear, though his manager, Colonel Parker, later blocked any further TV appearances for him. By the end of 1957, Boone and Elvis had carved out very different musical identities. Boone, though he had early rock hits like Tutti Frutti and Long Tall Sally, found his biggest success in heartfelt ballads. He had the smooth, polished sound of a classic crooner, more in line with Bing Crosby or Frank Sinatra. Elvis, meanwhile, continued to ride the rock wave, bringing raw energy and rebellious charisma to the stage. Still, the media pushed the idea of a rivalry, even hoping Boone would eventually eclipse Presley's popularity. A 1957 teen poll by Eugene Gilbert showed Elvis as the favorite male singer for 35% of American teenagers. But just 5 months later, that number had dropped to 21%, with Pat Boone rising to nearly 13% and gaining momentum fast. Even big names like Frank Sinatra weighed in. Sinatra publicly favored Boone, saying he had a stronger technique and a broader musical range. Presley, he argued, lacked training and would only prove himself if he moved into more serious styles of music. The press attention grew. Newsweek dedicated 4 full pages to Boone in August 1957, painting him as the wholesome antidote to rock's wild streak. They compared him to a modern-day Bing Crosby and praised his clean-cut image and accessible style. Critics like Abel Green of Variety predicted a return to smooth classic music and pegged Boone as the new standard-bearer. Nick Kenny called him a symbol of charm and poise, going so far as to label him a new Bing. One of the most extreme takes came from Terence O'Flaherty in the San Francisco Chronicle. Around the time Elvis visited the city in October 1957, O'Flaherty harshly criticized Presley while holding Boone up as a role model for America's youth. He urged parents to steer their kids toward Boone, framing it as a win for wholesome values over flashy showmanship. Then, in 1958, while filming King Creole, Elvis was asked directly who his favorite singer was. For the first time, he answered, Pat Boone. He called Boone one of the most versatile voices in the business and made it clear that he admired his talent, even though the two had never shared a stage after the first time. Through it all, Boone and Presley were never caught up in the media's invented rivalry. Boone even joked about the idea of settling it in a boxing ring at Madison Square Garden. But by 1958, the narrative had lost steam, especially after Elvis was drafted into the Army. Still, his pre-recorded music kept him alive on the charts until his return in 1960. While Elvis was off the scene, Boone's own reign at the top began to fade. In 1958 and 1959, he managed just one top 10 hit. Then, in 1961, he scored his fifth and final #1 with Moody River. He stuck with Dot Records and enjoyed some moderate success through the early 60s. But by 1966, the British invasion had changed everything, sweeping in a new era and pushing many early American pop icons, Boone included, out of the spotlight. Though his name is often tied to a so-called rivalry with Elvis, the truth is that narrative was mostly driven by the media. In reality, the two respected each other and carved out very different paths in the world of pop music. The man who tried to kill rock and roll. In the early 1960s, before the Beatles swept through America and changed everything, the rock and roll scene was in a strange, uncertain place. Elvis was off serving in the Army. Buddy Holly had tragically passed. And Jerry Lee Lewis was deep in scandal. For fans of real rock and roll, the pickings were slim. The charts were filled with polished teen idols like Frankie Avalon singing soft ballads like Venus, songs that hardly captured the raw, rebellious spirit rock had once promised. And then there was Mitch Miller, a name that often floated in the background of that pre-Beatle era. His music felt like an active attempt to smother rock and roll before it had a chance to truly grow. His style leaned more toward old-fashioned show tunes than anything that could stir youthful energy. In that same space, Pat Boone also rose to fame, and while he may have shared some of Miller's clean-cut appeal, Boone at least seemed to understand what rock and roll was supposed to sound like, even if his interpretations didn't quite hit the mark. Boone's covers of Elvis Presley's biggest hits often came across as overly sanitized, more like youth group sing-alongs than true rock anthems. One of the most glaring examples was his version of Tutti Frutti. Where Little Richard's original was explosive, wild, and full of life, Boone's rendition felt stripped of soul and rhythm. Watching him perform it on television, it became clear he wasn't quite in tune with the heartbeat of the music. His clapping landed off-beat, and the performance lacked the grit that defined rock at its core. But what made Boone such a curious figure was that, even with all the polish and restraint, he never seemed disingenuous. He wasn't trying to mock the genre. If anything, he was earnestly singing, just not quite grasping the emotional weight behind the music. It's that emotional disconnect that made Boone's version of rock and roll feel so different, where artists like Muddy Waters, Little Richard, and Howlin' Wolf channeled real pain, heartbreak, oppression, identity struggles. Boone sounded like someone whose biggest life challenge might have been not getting dessert after dinner. His music lacked the edge and urgency that rock fans craved. And in a time when rock was a voice for the unheard and the wounded, Boone came across as the face of comfort and conformity. He wasn't a villain, but for many, he represented a version of rock that had been watered down, stripped of danger, stripped of meaning. Critics and fans alike tossed around dramatic accusations, blaming Boone for softening the genre, for whitewashing its origins, and for making rebellion sound like it had to follow the rules. Still, it wouldn't be fair to say Boone lacked talent. His voice had a smooth, heartfelt quality, something that could genuinely move people, at times even echoing the polished charm of Sinatra. And Boone wasn't clueless about the jokes people made. He leaned into them, never taking himself too seriously, which only made some fans like him more. There are undeniably strong tracks in his catalog, proof that the talent was there, even if the edge wasn't. But when you hold Boone's version of rock and roll up against the gritty origins of the genre, the contrast is hard to ignore. It's like asking Rosemary Clooney to sing a Grady Slick anthem. Two great voices, just not built for the same song. When Pat went metal, In 1997, Pat Boone, long celebrated for his wholesome image and smooth, easy-listening voice, completely flipped the script. He released In a Metal Mood, No More, Mr. Nice Guy, an album filled with covers of classic rock and heavy metal anthems, reimagined in his own mellow, big band style. The idea wasn't just a publicity stunt. Boone and his band genuinely wanted to shake things up and experiment with something unexpected. Curiosity played a big role. Boone found himself browsing record stores near where he worked, flipping through albums by the likes of Scorpions and Motorhead. If something caught his attention, he'd buy it. But staying true to his clean-cut reputation, he took the time to study the songs carefully. He looked past the loud guitars and dramatic vocals to understand the lyrics and messages behind them. Songs that he initially assumed were about substances or rebellion often turned out to be much more personal or poetic than he expected. One example that stood out to him was Metallica's Enter Sandman, which he described as a dark-sounding song about an old-school bedtime scare tactic, a father warning his child about the boogeyman. As Boone dove deeper into the genre, he didn't go it alone. For the album, he brought in some heavy hitters from the rock world. Ronnie James Dio joined him with backing vocals on Holy Diver, and Ritchie Blackmore added a blazing guitar solo to a bossa nova version of Smoke on the Water. These collaborations helped bridge Boone's unexpected crossover from gospel crooner to metal interpreter. But the surprises didn't end with the music. When Boone showed up at the American Music Awards to promote the album, he made jaws drop. Ditching his signature clean-cut look, he arrived shirtless under a leather vest, decked out in fake tattoos, rings, and a spiked choker. It was all in good fun, but the transformation was so extreme that many fans, and especially religious viewers, weren't laughing. Not long after, Boone showed up on the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and you could feel the tension in the air. His trademark charm was still there, but something had changed. Still, the studio audience gave him a standing ovation. Even a group of rugged-looking bikers showed up, proudly backing their unexpected new icon. But Boone's bold new look didn't sit well with everyone. Many longtime TBN viewers were outraged, and the backlash came quickly. The network canceled his weekly show, Gospel America, and fans were urged to pray for him. Boone was stunned by the backlash. He had seen the costume and album as playful, not a total rejection of his faith or values. But when the network later asked its audience for feedback, the response was surprisingly supportive. Many viewers voted to bring Boone back, and he took the opportunity to apologize on air. He expressed regret for any hurt caused, emphasizing that he never meant to upset or confuse anyone. What amazed him most was how quickly people assumed he had completely abandoned everything he had stood for over the decades, just because of a costume and a few metal tracks. In time, things smoothed out. Boone returned to his clean-cut image, and life carried on. But that brief metal moment left a mark, and people didn't forget it. Boone's final words with the King. The last time Pat Boone saw Elvis Presley was in July of 1977. Boone was traveling with his wife and their 4 daughters, performing together as a family act. They were passing through Memphis, on their way to Orlando, when they found themselves at the airport at the same time as Elvis. The place was buzzing. Everyone knew Elvis was heading to Las Vegas, and his Cadillac limo sat out on the tarmac while he delayed boarding, still uneasy about flying. Boone and his family waited at the gate, hoping to catch a moment with him. Sure enough, Elvis stepped out of the car and came over to say hello. They chatted briefly and took a photo together, one Boone still keeps. He noticed Elvis had gained some weight and even playfully smacked his stomach, joking about it. Elvis laughed it off, saying he'd sweat it off in Vegas. When Elvis learned the Boones were heading to Orlando instead of Las Vegas, he couldn't resist a comment. he turned to his entourage and made a light-hearted remark about Boone always going the wrong way. Boone replied with a quick comeback, reminding him it all depended on perspective. Just 1 month later, on August 16, 1977, the world was shaken. Elvis Presley was found unconscious at his Graceland home and was later pronounced dead at the hospital. He was just 42 years old, the same age as Pat Boone at the time. Boone wasn't anywhere near Memphis that day. He was in Pittsburgh, getting a haircut before a performance with his family, when someone ran into the barber shop shouting the news. At first, he thought it had to be a terrible joke. But it wasn't. What made it hit even harder was how recently they'd spoken. The idea that Elvis could be gone just a month after that airport encounter felt impossible to grasp. Boone often reflects on that moment, remembering Elvis not just as the global icon, but as the young man he'd known, full of nerves, dreams, and a kind of fame neither of them could have fully prepared for. Pat Boone's life after the goodbye. In 2019, Pat Boone experienced one of the greatest losses of his life when his beloved wife, Shirley, passed away at the age of 84. A year earlier, she had been diagnosed with vasculitis, and complications from the illness eventually took her life. She passed peacefully at home, surrounded by family. Pat and their 4 daughters, Debbie, Cherry, Lindy, and Lori, were by her side, singing hymns as she took her final breath. It was a deeply emotional moment for a family that had shared a lifetime of love, music, and faith. Reflecting on her passing, Pat leaned heavily on his faith for comfort. After 65 years of marriage, he described their parting not as an end, but as a transition. For him, Shirley had simply moved to a new place, a heavenly home, where he hoped to join her someday. That belief gave him strength as he planned her memorial and adjusted to life without her. Since Shirley's passing, Pat has continued to live in the Beverly Hills home they shared since 1960. The house is more than just a residence. It's a living time capsule filled with decades of memories and mementos from his long and remarkable career. Being surrounded by these reminders of their life together brings him a sense of peace. Though he lives alone now, Pat keeps Shirley close in his heart. He often talks to her, finding comfort in those quiet moments. His little Cocker Spaniel, Shadow, keeps him company, and the pair share a calm routine in the home once full of family activity. In a quiet, emotional moment, Pat once softly sang a line from a classic tune. Just him and his shadow. But even in the sadness, he smiled, still feeling the warmth of the life they built together. On social media, Pat has shared touching tributes to Shirley. In one photo posted to Instagram, the two are seen looking at each other with deep affection. His caption reflected the ache of missing her, especially during the fall season, one of many moments when her absence is most deeply felt by him and his followers. Even in his later years, Pat hasn't slowed down. In 2022, he appeared in The Mulligan Movie and released a reflective book titled If, where he opened up about how his faith shaped not only his career, but his entire life. That same year, fans were delighted to learn that several of his Christmas songs, long recorded but never released, were finally becoming available on streaming platforms. And he's still having fun with his music. In 2023, Pat surprised everyone with a playful new single called Grits, a lighthearted tribute to the classic Southern dish. Amazingly, the song came to him in a dream. He dreamt he had a big country hit and woke up singing the first verse. To bring the song to life, he collaborated with country music stars like Ray Stevens, the Gatlin Brothers, Lori Morgan, Deborah Allen, and Dean Miller, son of Roger Miller. They even filmed the music video at the historic Capitol Theater in Lebanon, Tennessee. Pat, ever the showman, took on the challenge of learning an upbeat line dance for the video. no small feat at age 89. He admitted it wasn't easy, but his joy in the process was clear. That joy is something his fans continue to see in his public life. On Father's Day, the 2024, Pat shared a family photo featuring his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a powerful testament to the legacy he and Shirley built together. For Pat, being a father, grandfather, and great-grandfather is one of his proudest accomplishments, a lasting blessing rooted in love. Outside of music and family, Pat finds peace on the golf course. He's shared moments from the green on social media, showing that golf is one of his favorite ways to stay active and relaxed. But perhaps even more meaningful to him now is the opportunity to give back. In an interview with the Christian Post, Pat spoke openly about using his resources to support causes close to his heart. He's no longer focused on building wealth or fame, but rather on making an impact through generosity, something he calls a personal mission. He sees himself in a Joseph role, like the biblical figure known for his faith and service to others. Pat's creative spark hasn't dimmed. He's still writing, singing, and stepping onto the stage. In September 2024, he performed The Impossible Dream at the Roger Williams 100th commemorative birthday celebration, backed by the Concordia University Symphony Orchestra and Choir. It was a powerful moment, one he called an incredible honor. And when a friend posted the video online a month later, the reaction was immediate. Fans flooded the comments, some moved to tears, others simply in awe of his voice and message. Even at 91, Pat Boone continues to inspire, proving that no dream is ever truly out of reach. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, comment, and turn on post notifications to stay updated with our latest content.